Today, I'm joined by Mark, who's currently working in the research team at LayerZero. He's also the comms guy for LayerZero and a very good friend. So I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Arjun. I don't think I've been on a video recording with you since this was called the Cross Chain Insider. So it's fun to be back. And my actual title at LZ is Narratively, which I guess encompasses all of that, ranging from research, marketing to comms. So yeah.
That actually makes this conversation even better because we're going to talk about marketing and Interop narratives and also like you as a writer, how you approach writing. So why don't we start with a quick introduction on how you got started in the Interop industry?
Yeah, so I've been at LayerZero for almost a year now. Started in November of 2023. Before that, I was at Li-Fi, writing a lot of research with you for almost 2 years. I think a year and 10 months is what my LinkedIn says. And before that, I was working at Unchained Pod, and we had actually met when I was an intern, just writing some research reports for a small little research company. But really, got into Interop when I joined Li-Fi back, early 2022. I think February of 2022, and have seen the industry grow from something that maybe 50 people knew about to now being kind of de facto for most applications in the space. And I think we've gotten to the point where at least all of the people working in crypto know that Interop exists, and I think a few people outside of the industry might know that it exists. And it's been very fun to kind of see that growth and be writing and putting out tweets and creating videos all throughout that time.
What was your thesis back then in 2022, right? Like when both of us were kind of just starting out, the multi-chain thesis was just a thesis. So what made you take the jump into joining an Interop company?
I made the jump. I've heard that tagline before. It's funny. I remember, thinking back in late 2021 that I wanted to go work at a startup and I wanted to go deep on a certain topic. And I remember writing down NFTs or bridges because I was looking at the space, and this was late 2021. I was like, there's really not that many people in the world that know what an NFT is, and there's not that many people in the world that know what a bridge is. I think that if I just spend the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, like really trying to understand this topic, starting to write about it, become, at the time, I wanted to be like a threador, right? I wanted to be the person whose threads went viral, whose tweets went viral, giving insight and analysis on a certain vertical. And I ended up, going with bridges, not really because it was like a huge burning passion, but mostly because you had a major passion for it and pitched me on it. And I remember like the earliest version of Li-Fi, which I tried, was like pretty much just a Connext router, right, with maybe a swap on the end of it. I don't even know if you could bridge and swap at the same time on the V1. But anyways, kind of came into bridges mostly because of Arjun. And then once I got in there, like my idea was to become like a knowledge expert in a field, which is one of the reasons why crypto is so amazing, I think, for young people, is that like if you really come in and grind on a topic, start putting out content, start like really researching how this stuff works from an architecture standpoint, actually going in, reading white papers, asking the right questions, you can become someone that can form opinions and shape opinion in the space.
I think like even when I joined, I did not have a burning passion, right? Like I just had a simple thesis because I was using multiple chains. So I figured like everyone would use multiple chains, and you were using multiple chains. I know you were big into Solana NFTs at that point, and you still have an Instagram profile where you kind of collect all of your trades, NFT trades. But I feel like that was a simple thesis, and I just started working on that because both of us were working at the same company early on. I was like, Mark, you have to join this team because we're kind of building something interesting here. So maybe talk a little bit
Yeah.
more about like how was Interop different back then? Like we talked about how it was just a thesis. So what was the ecosystem at that point, and what were the players that were live at that point?
Yeah. So going into my taking a job at Li-Fi, right, that was late 2021, early 2022. And if I remember correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, but at that time, the chains that were popping up that these bridges were connecting were, for the majority, like mostly all L1s. So it was like Solana, it was like Avalanche, it was Polygon, it was BNB chain. And then you also had like kind of the the earliest other chain ecosystems like Cosmos and Polkadot and Cardano, and so it was like kind of a weird grouping of chains to connect, and the bridges that were going to connect them were like, we can focus like mostly on the alt EVM stuff because that's where most of the chain connections are. No one could really do that Cardano to Ethereum thing. I don't think anyone can even do
I
that.
feel like it was more Ethereum, Polygon, and some L2s had started to come up, right? Solana was still there, but there were no actual bridges connecting them back
Correct.
then.
I'm just talking about the chain landscape. Like
Mhm.
from like conceptually, when you're building out a thesis, you're looking at all these chains and you're saying, oh, okay, so like we have like maybe 10 chains right now that need to be connected, and bridges, where I was about to get to, can really only connect like 5 of them, right? It can connect Avalanche and Polygon and Mainnet and Phantom at the time. Phantom was massive
Mhm.
as well. And when you looked at the space, there was probably about 6 bridges that mattered early on. By the time I started at LeFi, I believe Across was live, Connects was live, Hyphen was live, Stargate was just launching, and who else was a major player at the time that I'm
There was
forgetting?
you mentioned Phantom, right? So there was multi-chain and there was
Yep,
Seabridge that
yep,
had
yep,
the
yep.
Binance connection.
Yep. Seabridge crushed it for a really long time
Mhm.
in terms of volume, and multi-chain, of course. Yeah,
But if you look at the list back then, it was a lot of like, we can call them centralized now because multi-chain no longer exists, but it was a lot of cheap and fast transfers, right? Like I remember talking to some LPs, some users, some application developers, and they were like, multi-chain is our go-to bridge because it's just cheap, right? Like, and it happens within some seconds or some minutes. So even back then, the theme still existed where cheap and fast was better, but the trade-offs were just wrong, right?
yeah, and I won't name any teams there in terms of centralization or lack of centralization, because as we talk about all the time, centralization is a spectrum, decentralization is a spectrum, everything is a spectrum. But the crazy thing about coming to work at LeFi in early 2022 and starting to write about bridges and looking at the space, when you talk about marketing, right? Everyone was saying they were cheap and fast and that they could connect chains. But then when you really looked at it, literally no one had written information outside of documentation on how these things worked and how they compared to each other. And so when you and I started writing, like we were literally having to go to docs and go to teams and like ask them questions on like, wait, how does this actually work? What does this contract wrapper actually mean? How are you like? What are the actual trust assumptions for this relayer architecture? And it was really crazy looking back on it, because like the SEO didn't exist. Like if you looked up fast bridge, cheap bridge, trusted bridge, nothing was there. And now 3 years later, like all that stuff is built out, and I think a lot of people are starting to understand that all of these different interop mechanisms have different trade-offs. But at the time, there was literally nothing. I remember I wrote a deep dive on Gnosis chain, and was like, and also Avalanche Bridge. Like those were like 2 of my first things that I wrote at LeFi. And I'll go specifically to Avalanche Bridge. There was literally no article about it anywhere outside of docs, and I had to go and ask their team about it. And it took me like 2 months to write this like 1,500 word essay. Ended up being great, and their documentation is fantastic now. Like I don't want to like pick on Avalanche. I just want to like point out that there was really no secondary materials. There was nothing for thread ors to thread about, and like it was fun for me and you to become those first people to do so.
Funny story here, like when I was hired for LeFi, one of the main goals was attracting organic traffic through search volume, and there was no search volume, right? Like how can you do SEO for non-existent search volume? So how we ended up with this formula of like deep dives was basically what you just described, right? Like there's a bridge, we want to write about it, we want to write a deep dive about it just to show that we have done our due diligence properly. And there was just like the docs and me asking questions to the founders and the teams about how does this actually work, understanding it and then putting it on paper, right? And that's what worked 3 years ago. But talking about Interop today, I feel like this will no longer work, right? Like if I have to do a deep dive today, it's like bread and butter in a way. I can finish it in a week or two, and it's not that interesting anymore, right? Like if you've noticed, I have not put out too many deep dives because I feel like you said, the docs have become better. There's not too much nuance that I can add on top of the docs. I can probably add my opinion, which I'm getting more and more used to now. but the docs are just better, and the deep dives do not work anymore because the information is already there. It's not that interesting for anyone to read, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a few things to pull on there. One is that the initial boost you get from education is gone because the first round of education is out there. What are bridges? What are L2s? What is an interop protocol compared to a bridge? Or you could call it what is an AMB, arbitrary messaging bridge, compared to a liquidity network, is probably the correct vernacular there. And like you're not just going to get boost from writing that. You know, if I see an essay today written by a new interop provider that says why crypto needs, you know, XYZ cross-chain solution, I'm going to be like, okay, I've seen this since 2022, since 2023. And then the next thing here, when in terms of like content marketing and go-to-market strategies, is if you look at what's really being built in the interop space, you know, there's really nothing new now. We've kind of settled in that we have, you know, general message passing, which is this is what we do at LayerZero. Any, you know, arbitrary packet of data can be sent from chain A to chain B. You have applications that can deploy across many chains and kind of like control asset deployment or application deployment through kind of a single interface. And then you have liquidity networks, which allow for token transfers via either intents or liquidity pools. And like outside of that, there's really not much new. And so you see like a lot of narratives being formed kind of out of nothing. Like you're kind of reframing what's already there. And so like if you look at something like chain abstraction, right? That's kind of a go-to-market for new interop providers who are essentially relaunching intents or relaunching general message passing in a slightly different packaged version, right? Like I'm at LayerZero, I'm reading something about chain abstraction, and everything they say, I'm like, oh, LayerZero is actually chain abstraction, right? Like it allows an application to exist on multiple chains and kind of can like, you know, like an executor does gas abstraction, and it's like very easy, but it's just a repackaging, right? It's not necessarily like a ground, like, you know, like a foundational shift, a foundation premise. And so the way you go to market, the way you educate is slightly different now than just like being able to, you know, kind of go viral for, you know, explaining the basic things like we did back in the day at LI.F.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. So I don't want to get into intents and chain abstraction because I feel like in terms of marketing, they have something new to talk about, right? So they can still go through that whole educational arc. But what about an interop protocol that's launching a messaging bridge, right? Like they're launching probably 2-3 years into this interop cycle, and there's nothing new to talk about, like you said. So what should they talk about? Like how do they stand out in the ecosystem?
You're asking me what to give advice to a potential competitor? Oh my gosh.
I mean, if it was that easy, they would have done it by now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I'll kind of take this question and go a different way, but you know, I think early on in like a go-to-market or a launch strategy, it was very easy. Like if you look at LayerZero's launch, like literally how we went viral is that our founder Brian, LayerZero Labs founder, Brian went on Twitter. He posted a thread, which kind of, you know, talked about and launched both LayerZero and Stargate. And then he also posted a video which went viral. And if you look at kind of go-to-market strategies now, threads are dead, right? Like they are not doing well. They don't exist. You have long form now. Elon has since bought Twitter. And so content strategies have totally changed in the last 2 years. And then on top of that, like long form videos, um, I've kind of looked at our data. Like long form videos is good for like building like 1,000 true fans, right? Like maybe you're going to have a few people watch this for the full 45 minutes. I don't know how many people actually are. But like the real virality is on like clipped like 10 seconds of opinion, or perhaps even a launch video that's like 18 seconds long. That's gonna like, you know, really pack a punch in what's being launched. But again, I think it's hard. I think you're working on a platform like Twitter, which is the main comms channel for most of crypto, that has shifting parameters all the time. I wake up most days pretty surprised by what is going viral right now. And it kind of makes it hard to create like cadences and marketing plans when things might change overnight, which I'm sure you also kind of run into all the time.
Yeah, it feels like there are two Twitters, right? Like one for your time zone and then one for my time zone. So what I wake up to is definitely different from what you wake up to. Uh, and
Yeah,
And you
and it's
also
also
go
it's
on.
also just hard to like really get a feel because I've actually gone back to using my following page instead of for you because the for you page it makes it so hard to keep track of industry because it just reflects what you want to see, right? And so I've been like very targeted in curating my following page to where I can actually track what I think is the industry kind of threads that are going viral there because I don't trust the for you quite as much in terms of like content curation for crypto anymore. That might be a hot take, but it's something that I think is like a big plus for me.
Are you also someone that uses lists on Twitter? Like I've seen a lot of people use it. I'm not a fan because like I first cannot, I don't want to make a list. I'm just not a user, right? So are you a list user?
I was a list user back in the day. I've just gone back to creating like maximizing and curating my following as best I can because there's just limited time and the people that can like keep 15 lists and click between them like more power to them. But like I need one stream to keep track of.
So you were talking about when LayerZero launched, there was a thread by Brian and then a video as well, right? So I kind of want to talk about founder-led marketing here. I know we were talking about it a little bit off here as well. So what are your thoughts on that? Should protocols actually do this? Like there's also talk about founder-led BD, founder-led everything, right? So should founders actually spend time on Twitter and build a following for their protocol?
So I think there's multiple ways to go about it. Again, I don't want to give broad advice and think have people listen and think that's the only way to do it. And I think founder-led comms. Here, let me take a sip of coffee here. I think founder-led comms can be very powerful when done well. I can also think that they can be overdone if relied upon too heavily. The way I think about it is doing direct comms, right? What is the like best way to take an idea and present it to market in a way that is clear, concise, and powerful, right? Because I think founder-led comms, you get that last word like very easily powerful, right? They're telling their story in a way that like it's really hard for like copy to do, and so that's why like at LayerZero, we did a V2 launch back in the day, back in January, and we did founder-led comms there, where it was Brian kind of in a room talking about LayerZero V2, the differences between V1, going from Relayer and Oracle to DVNs and executors and all that fun stuff. And it was like a 14-minute video, and like if you look at it, it's really just Brian being passionate about this thing. And like I think it's probably too technical for maybe the average listener. I think if you're like deep into crypto, you definitely understand what's going on. But what really pops is the passion, right? Like even if you're not, fully understanding the difference between a relayer and an executor, you're at least being like, this guy is excited and like chains are being connected and data packets. He does like his arbitrary bytes array hand motion. And I think that's very cool. But again, I don't think that everything needs to be founder led, but I do think everything needs to be direct. I think you need to be distilling information and packaging it in like in the most authentic way that you can, right? It doesn't need to be like the perfect like kind of like I would call it almost VC speak, where it's like the exclamation point at the beginning of your first sentence, and you have like your emoji, and it's like kind of just what you think an announcement would look like. I would much rather have authentic comms, and
Just
so
like give it more character.
yes, for sure. Like just say the thing. Don't like, beat around the bush. Just be excited if you're going to be excited. Be direct if you want to be direct. And if you have to do anything in terms of crisis comms, just go out, be clear, right?
Hmm.
And you can go founder led if you want. You can go direct. I don't think it really matters. So you look at what LeFi has done. Almost all of LeFi comms are directed from the company handle. There's not much, like founder-led stuff and compared to others. I look at like Uniswap, right? Like Hayden is out there, but they also do a good balance. So like there's a bunch of different ways to go about it. And I won't speak for LeFi because I'm not there, but you lead comms there and you're not doing founder-led stuff. So I think that's probably a thesis of yours as well.
No, so I would like to have founder-led comms, but it doesn't have to be like that, right? So founder-led comms can have different meanings. It does not have to mean that the founder does the announcement. What my definition of founder-led comms is that the founder is active and has an opinion on the ecosystem, right? And he's trying to build a following so that he can just increase awareness of his protocol through that. Now, it does not have to be the founder, because the founder has 20 other things to do other than tweeting. You can make the case that tweeting is also important, sure, but that's why you hire people, right? So that's why you can hire a team around you. You can build up people in such a way that they can build up their own brands, and as their brand increases, as their brand grows, the company account also grows, and it's vice versa, right? Like, if my account does well, LeFi does well. If LeFi does well, my account does well. So it's kind of like a good symbiotic relationship in that way.
Yeah, and I think again, there's like so many different ways to go about it. I also think like founder-led comms can be a crutch for a lot of people, where it's like they don't have to push out interesting content because founder just goes and gets in fights, and I just don't think that's like a great way to grow in the space in a healthy manner, right? Like you want people to be like coming to your protocol and or application and being like, oh, this is really cool. I enjoy it. Anyways.
Yeah, I just feel like right now there's a template for everyone, and founder-led comms has become a template. So I just think that it's not a given that you should follow it. Just do your thing. If you have, like, if you as a founder are a communication guy, are a writer, do it more often if you have the time. But like, you can always hire and you can figure it out, right? Like, you don't have to do it in the first 6 months. You can do it more in the next 6 months. So just don't look at it as a formula. But another interesting trend in Interop is that we have more and more video content these days, right? LayerZero also launched a podcast, I think last week, where you did an episode with the BitGo founder. You guys invested heavily into a podcast setup. You had a full room. You're the producer behind it. So I want to get your thoughts behind, like, what's your thinking there? Why did you do it in the first place? Because since you invested in the setup, this cannot be an overnight thought, right? I know you've been thinking about it. So give me your thesis on why you did that, and your thoughts on, is the space going in that direction? Are we going to see more and more video content? And is the thinking the same, that okay, show your face, share your thoughts, show your character, and then people can relate to you more?
Yeah, so the podcast room actually kind of erupted from just kind of shared experience in our office. You know, LayerZero is a very, very big whiteboarding culture, to where like we'll sit around and kind of debate different topics while sitting in a room. And, it'll start like, 3 to 5 minutes. We'll be sitting around like a table, and then all of a sudden, someone will be up on a whiteboard, drawing out diagrams explaining why this will work or why this won't work. And to me, those were always the most interesting conversations to be a part of, because that's where like the kind of inner nerd comes out, right? That's why like that's where the energy of we're trying to build something that is better than finance and better than the internet, right? Which is what I think crypto is. That's where like the energy comes out, at least in the LayerZero office on the whiteboard. And so we kind of built this podcast room, which is like a pretty fun room if you go look at it. Like we have a poker table set up in there. It's kind of like dark and green, and we tried to make it look really cool. But the main component of the room is actually a digital whiteboard, where we have guests, as well as people inside of LayerZero, go up and explain the topic that we're talking about, like on the whiteboard, drawing it out in a way that people can like follow. Because I think something with a lot of podcasts out now, and video content is getting more and more popular. Because I mean, look at us right now, we're just on a Zoom call, and this can be turned into a podcast, right? This can be turned into something you push out on Substack and on Twitter, and you can repackage this 10 times if you want, based on short clips of me saying silly things if you wanted to. And it's very easy. However, it's hard to make really, really great content. And so with this podcast room, we decided on how to like differentiate ourselves would be to create this room, own the look, create a whiteboarding experience that I haven't seen elsewhere, right? And I just like, you can do whiteboarding stuff on like a Zoom call where you bring up the whiteboard, but like it's like still on the computer and it's kind of ugly. Or you can try to do like an actual whiteboard or chalkboard. I just don't think those look good. We just try to create like a very curated, deep watching experience. So I hope people like it. We just launched our first video with BitGo, so that was part of our go-to-market strategy for BitGo launching WBTC as an OFT. We put out this 45-minute conversation with Mike Belshi, the CEO of BitGo, and Brian and Simon from the LayerZero Labs team. And we'll be doing more of those. Perhaps you can come in and I've been wanting to debate the history of Interop with you for a really long time, and I think that could be a fun place to do so. We can get a timeline up on the whiteboard and debate whether like Thorchain or multi-chain was the first bridge or something like that. I don't know.
I feel like on most of your episodes, Brian is just gonna get up with the marker in his hand and start drawing something on the whiteboard, because I've seen him do it multiple times already.
I know. I mean, I would love would love feedback from you on it, of course. But um, I, I could be tempted to just have the whole thing be up at the whiteboard and have nothing sitting around the table. But I do think there's something about like sitting down and like looking someone in the eye and like having that back and forth before you jump up there. At least to like intro people, especially if you're going to talk about technical concepts. That's another thing when you talk about what LayerZero is building. It's a semi-complex topic, right? Like if you want to abstract it away as much as you can say, okay, LayerZero connects chains, applications, and tokens exist everywhere. Done. But if you want to like get down into the weeds, right? If you want to get excited about it, it's going to be semi-technical. And to like explain that succinctly is very hard. To explain that on a whiteboard, not that hard. And so like when in terms of like, what we ship, like why would we make it super hard on ourselves to condense when we could also do long form as well? We can condense on Twitter, long form with the videos, and so different ways to produce information and publish.
I feel like the interaction is important because you have to set context for everyone, right? Like you cannot think that everyone is like me, probably has a lot of context on OFTs, the BitGo announcement, and I can probably just like jump into the whiteboarding session because I that's what I like as well. But I like the whole setup, right? And I totally agree with your point on you need to find your edge, right? Like why should someone watch your content when there's so much of like video content, right? So that's why that's something that I questioned multiple times, like how can I create content that's different to others? And that's where I felt like, okay, people are not focusing on Interop enough. Interop gets a bad rep every time. Everyone likes to shit on Interop, and there are some really cool people working in the industry, right? So let me just talk to these guys and bring a different side to their story. But I feel like people see this as video content and then try to replicate it, but it's not going to work out the same way if like you have a thesis like LayerZero that okay, this setup works well, we have a whiteboarding culture, and you're just vibing there, right? But someone else looking at it as a marketing formula will just go in a different direction, and the results will not be the same.
Yeah, I mean, of course, launching a podcast of that nature is marketing, but it's also I talk about direct comms, like that's as authentic as we can get. Like that is like that conversation is what it feels like to think about and talk about LayerZero with people who believe that LayerZero is like the interop protocol to solve the blockchain communication problem. And so like that's how we decided to do it. I think other people should find their own way to authentically communicate, and perhaps that is like through like I think the podcast to me is oftentimes like the easiest thing to do, and I think people should like go back to like there's writing, there is like creating beautiful imagery, right? There's a bunch of other ways to go about this. I think the newsletter thing has died down, but I would love to see an increase in actual newsletters I want to read in the space. I think there's a lot of different ways to go about marketing in the space right now.
Yeah, I think even there with the newsletters as well, you have to get your reasons right on like why you're doing it. I feel the only reason I've been consistent with our newsletter is because I need that information for myself, right? So I'm gonna do it anyway, even if no one reads it. But while I'm doing it, why not just publish it as a newsletter? And maybe that's why people also like it, right? Like I'm just sharing information that I'm consuming, and I'm tapped into the Interop ecosystem, right? So if someone tries to replicate it, again, it's not going to work out the same way because your reasons are not the same. So I kind of want to get into the writing side of things, right? So what do you feel like? Why do you feel writing is important for like written content is important for interop protocols, and should that be a strategy? Like, should people hire a writer in their team from the early days, or is that something that they can just ignore for a while?
I mean, this goes back to just like a grander thesis for life, but I think writing is one of the most important things or most important skills anyone can have. And it never hurts to have someone who can write clearly and concisely on a team. I think that's fantastic. I think that writing forces you to put ideas down on paper and make sure that they make sense rather than just saying what you think or creating like a really short tweet that goes viral but perhaps is not directionally correct. I also think writing has like a really in terms of crypto, like I think it's important in Interop, but I also just think it's important in crypto in general. Like if you look at the history of crypto, like everyone's a writer. Like all of the best VCs are putting out fantastic content. Vitalik started his kind of career as a writer for Bitcoin magazine. You have Satoshi, who is just like a fantastic writer. If you go look at like all the Bitcoin talk forums, I mean, just like one of the best writers I've ever read. The white paper is still, I think, my favorite document ever. I think it's so clear, and I just think writing is so helpful. And so, is it a go-to-market strategy for Interop? Yes. Is it a go-to-market strategy for crypto in general? Yes. I think that like if you're hiring, if someone can write, it's usually a good sign that they can think. And so, yeah, I don't know if it really directly answered your question, but I just think writing is so important. And to kind of like say, is writing for good for Interop? It's like obviously yes.
Mhm. But like so, like we talked about earlier, 3 years ago you could write educational content and get away with it, like we did. But what do you write about now when the basics are done? How do you set yourself apart, right? I know you have some thoughts on how my writing has changed over 3 years, so maybe you can use some of those examples and talk about it.
Yeah, so we started off writing a lot of education and market research. Here are the options for bridging, and here is how they are differentiated. Was something that we wrote. Like if you look at navigating AMBs, that was a long form article we wrote. We compared 8 different arbitrary messaging bridges. Funny enough, I am now at LayerZero and AMB. I bet you can guess which of those bridges ends up being my favorite. And sorry, AMBs, not bridges. I used the incorrect term there. I'll get the slap on the wrist. But now when you talk about what I like to see being written, what your writing has kind of changed to is more insight driven analysis, right? Here is stuff happening on chain. Here is the actual pieces of architecture being put into practice by these protocols. And here is kind of a slice of my opinion based on data that it took me 3 months to figure out. And like the stuff that we put out now is a much higher bar of content, I think, than what was originally given a thumbs up by a reader. I think to kind of cut through the noise, you need to be putting out something that is like really well researched. And I mean, I think your recent piece on solvers was a great example of a well researched, impactful piece. And I just don't think that like general education or like the shill of a company works as much. So it's like, is anyone going to be really clicking on like a why LayerZero or why LeFi or a why Uniswap or why I don't know 1inch article right now? Probably not. You need to like have a clickier headline that has depth to it.
I feel like this has also changed a lot because of AI, right? Like, uh, you can just write content so easily now that if I have a topic in my mind, like why LeFi, I can probably write that with AI in 3 hours, right? And you will not be able to know it's AI or not. And like you said, it just has to be something different because these days now, when I look at an article, I'm either very interested to read the entire thing in like one go, or I'm turned off after a few paragraphs, right? Like there's no in between. I'm not giving anyone 5 minutes of my time and then figuring out do I want to finish it or not. It's just like within the first two paragraphs and the premise of the article, I'm deciding if this is worth my time or not. So I totally agree with that. And you spend a lot of time writing. In general, and to be honest, you're actually one of my favorite writers overall. Even though like at LayerZero you can't use a lot of your flair because you have to be more technical, but I genuinely like your writing style. But do you have a specific writing process? Because I know some writers, like I've also read a book called The Process, and some of these writers actually have a process, right? Like they have a routine where they wake up every morning and they're like, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, I'm going to sit at my desk for the next 3 hours, and I'm going to write something, right? But that never works for me. But do you have a specific writing process, a specific place that you like to sit in while writing?
So I don't have a specific place, but when I'm writing, I listen to the same album on repeat. It's Mount Joy's album, Mount Joy, really creative name. And I've probably listened to it on repeat every day for an hour or two since I was like 15. Because it's just like it's one of my favorite albums, and like I don't have to listen to it. It's just kind of white noise, and that gets me into the groove, right? It's like kind of a signal to my brain where it's like, tune everything else out. Right now, it's just the screen and you. Another thing is like in terms of setup, if I'm writing, I'm never gonna have a monitor on, right? It's just gonna be like me and the small laptop because distractions are killer, especially in terms of thought processes. And then the last thing in terms of kind of writing style is um, my like if you say, hey Mark, write an 1,000-word essay, um, my writing style is gonna kind of wax poetic, and it's probably gonna not be technical, right? If I'm gonna just write for fun, it's just gonna be very personal. And if anyone reads like Bill Simmons or probably if we'll keep this crypto like Arthur Hayes, it's gonna be a very voicey, it's gonna be a very opinionated writing style. And now a lot of the times I'm writing kind of technical stuff for LayerZero, or I'm writing a research report, and I kind of want to take that voice out because I want to replace that voice with insight. I want to replace that voice with actual fact. What I do is I give myself constraints, right? If I'm going to go on my own, I'm going to go and I'm going to write just like ridiculous paragraphs, and a 1,000-word essay might turn into 3,000. But if I'm going to write from LayerZero, I sit down and I say, okay, I want to explain this concept. I want to use this amount of images, and I want to have this amount of words. And those are my constraints. I cannot go over them. I cannot go under them. I have to hit them exactly. And inside those constraints, that allows me to be creative, right? Okay, now that I know what I'm working against, here's how I'm going to produce. And so that's a bit into my process. I think every writer has something else, but I recommend constraints because if you just go up to a page that's blank, you do docs.new, right? You loads up your Google Doc and you say, I'm going to write about LayerZero V2 today. I guarantee you that is going to be the messiest, least outlined, ugliest, piece of writing you'll ever come across. If you go and say, okay, I'm going to write about LayerZero V2 today, it's going to be 2,000 words. Inside 2,000 words, I'm going to have 8 images. Each image is going to have its own section. All of a sudden, you have, like 400 words per section, and it's like a really kind of formatted thing, and it gets much better.
It's interesting you talk about constraints and like 2,000 words, and then you cannot write anything below 10,000 words.
I cut though. No, I think if you look back at a lot of my stuff, I've actually gotten better at cutting down. But I also think there is, and this is something that I will like really push on, even if a lot of people say to cut down. Like my authentic way to write is going to be longer. And if you go look at like the LayerZero V2 deep dive that I published after V2 launched, that thing is like 13,000 words, which is still really long. My first draft of that was 20,000 plus, right? So I cut down almost more than half of it, right, to condense. And I could have cut down more. But in terms of authenticity, in terms of like my opinion, right, I'm gonna be a long form person. I'm not gonna force myself to get down to 5,000 words just because it might get a few extra clicks, because I believe that my thoughts, and not even my thoughts, like your thoughts, anyone else's thoughts, if I'm editing them, like I'm not going to force them to kind of do arbitrary things to hit some word limit. I think that authenticity shines, and sometimes it's okay if it's a little longer, or even if it's a little shorter than you were expecting. But I do think constraints help in terms of like the actual production process, like sitting down and being like, okay, I just have these 2,000 words, and if you get to the end of it and you have 2,500 and you just can't cut them, like that's okay.
And I also want to talk about like the role of an editor, because I know you think that you're a better editor than a writer, and that's why both of us work so well together. Because I'm not a great editor, I just want to be writing, and then I feel like you as an editor just find the right spots to hit on, right? Like you mentioned the point about being more opinionated, so you would just come onto my docs and be like, add more voice to this, or like say what you actually believe in this, something of that sort, and then that would actually push me to have a bold opinion, or like actually put to paper my real thoughts, and then the end product would just be better, right? So my question here is, what do you think is the role of an editor? Does that have to be a different person, or can the same person do both roles?
I think editing is the most important part of the writing process. And like I don't think I would publish anything at LayerZero without the help of Mitch or Brian or Max, who give like really deep feedback and edit me. But it has been a process of like figuring out how to find a new editing style, especially since I joined LayerZero, because you and I had written 250,000, 300,000 words on Interop together, and we had a very like cadenced editing schedule. It's been interesting, trying to figure out how to do that on my own. I'm sure we've talked. I'm sure you had similar issues. But in terms of the editing process, right? I think that's where like the real insights and the real opinions come, because a lot of the times when you're drafting, you're too lost in the weeds, right? You're too deep into sentence structure. You're too deep into like grabbing the data that you spent so long pulling from this thing. You are too focused on your original thesis, right? A lot of the times when you start writing something, you start with a premise and you end somewhere far different. And then you go back and you have like tiny threads from that original premise kind of layered throughout that you just have to cut, right? And as the writer, you're just not going to see them because you wrote it and you're just like you can't quite like distance yourself from it. And that's where the editor can come in and be like, hey, I think this is a different article now. Just go take this out, save it for later, throw it away. Yeah.
And I can actually confirm that Mark believes in these things because I have proper drafts that have been thrown out or turned into different articles. Because he just comes onto my docs and like there's a big section that says not good enough or like good, very good, something of that sort, and then you have to start again, right? But totally agree with you. Like just having a second opinion on things is always better, right? Because like my original thesis might not make sense, so having an editor who knows how to write well, what the actual end goal should be, is always helpful, right? So we talked about writing, we talked about editing. Now your content is ready to be published. What do you think about distribution, or like how do you think about distribution? Are there specific steps that you usually take? Like, do you have a checklist, or do you just go with the flow?
I used to go with the flow. I'm now a checklist guy. Content distribution is difficult because a lot of the times, especially with what we love to do, which is a long form, you can spend weeks to months on a topic. And by the time you're ready to press send, you've been thinking about it for so long that putting out more content on it almost feels like you're like doing a disservice to your soul. It's like, I'm ready to move on. Like, please, I don't want to think like for me, right? I wrote a piece about DVN, decentralized verifier networks, and it took me probably 2 weeks to do that. By the time I wanted to press sends, I'm like, I don't want to ever type DVN again. However, as the writer, you have to distance yourself. It's kind of like the same thing with writing and editing. With writing and editing, you have to distance yourself to do either one right. So like the writer has to be pretty far away to be able to actually form sentences. Editor needs to be pretty far away so that they can cut. You then also have to create a different relationship with like writer and marketer, right? So you have to say, hey, like because a lot of times in crypto, like I'll write something and then I'm also the marketer for it. I'm also the distributor for it, and so I have to be like, it's almost two different people. Like, oh, Mark, thank you so much for writing this article. Now I'm going to Mark, the marketer, and I'm going to have to go push this out 10 different times, right? And like I just can't think about the process that went into it. And it's very hard to do. And like that's why previously it was kind of like, oh, I'll just put this out once or twice. Now kind of Twitter algo's changed. I think you need more of a cadence. You need to say, okay, I'm going to push this out day 1. I'm going to push this out day 3, day 7, day 14. Same idea. I'm going to have a Twitter space. I'm going to have partners retweet this. I'm going to have certain people edit this piece at the very end so that they feel like they had an opinion that shaped it, and then I'm going to ask them to quote tweet it, right? And so like there's this kind of cycle, this cadence that you can get into to really distribute a piece that I think is very important. However, it's so hard to do because like as soon as you like finish a piece and you feel done with it, like at least for me, I don't want to spend any more time on it. I want to go work on the next thing, but you have to spend that time on doing that cadence and putting it out in the market.
Yeah, it's like having three different personalities, right? Like my personal trick is to take a break and come back to it when I feel motivated. Usually it's the next day. Sometimes it's in like the next 3 4 hours. But take a break. You've put something out. Do it justice by distributing it well, right? And I feel like you kind of mentioned a dark arts tactic there for marketing by saying that you can have multiple people edit it so that they feel they have an opinion, and then they kind of feel like they need to engage with it, right? But I feel that can backfire as well, right?
I
Sometimes
mean,
I feel
let me rephrase that. I don't want to go viral for being rude. I actually like think it's very important to get outside opinion on your piece, right? So like I'm at LayerZero. I can get opinion from Mitch, who's my editor at LayerZero. I can get opinion from Max or Brian or whoever else, someone on the BD team, right? However, getting an outside opinion, getting your opinion, getting someone else in the Interop industry's opinion, getting someone that works at a DEX, getting someone that doesn't work in crypto, getting their opinion is super critical. However, the tweaks that they're going to offer, like the actual edits, are sometimes not exactly what you want, right? You want to take their feedback and make small tweaks. You don't want to take their feedback and be like, I have to rewrite this entire thing for this specific target audience, because sometimes, one piece of feedback from someone that works in a different sector of the industry, like it could feel like it could ruin your piece, but like you just have to be confident in your content and put it out. So I just want to add a bit more
I
layer
feel
to
like more than the edits, it's about the conversations that lead to the
yep,
thoughts, right? Like
exactly.
so many times it's, let's say, intense is the topic, right? So I would talk to six people, three from the intense camp and three not from the intense camp. So I would form an opinion over 3 months, over 6 months, and then when I'm about to write these things, then it's important to like shout out those people, and then they feel uh, more inclined to retweet it, right? But I feel the wrong way to do it is just like send it to 20 people, post their name at the end of the article, and then
Yep.
send it to them at the end of the day.
No,
It will never
that's not
work
what
out
you
the
do.
same way.
You have to get like, I agree. I think the conversations are very important. And also like getting a diverse set of opinions there for the bottom is also like critical. So I've had a lot of great feedback over the years. I feel like I made an offhand remark that would make some people mad, but I think it's important.
Okay. So, I mean, you've been writing for a long time, right? And you told me that you have a passion for writing in general. Is there anything that you're doing today to improve as a writer, or is it just as simple as writing more?
I think it's as simple as writing more, and it is as hard as writing more. I think writing is very fun. I just sometimes hate it. I bet you have a similar relationship where it's like there are days when it's a slog, right? Where like I just don't want to sit down and put out thoughts. But in terms of like getting better at writing, I also think like trying out different styles is a very important thing, and also inputs is something that I find helps. Like my writing is never going to get better if I'm only reading crypto research or crypto articles or crypto Twitter. I have to like expand my intake to other places. Some of my favorite things is going into sci-fi. I love going into like short stories from Neil Gaiman. That's like one of my like, if I need like inspiration, I always go to Neil. I love reading old like Bill Simmons articles. Kind of basic stuff if I need to get into inspiration for an article. But other than that, like read nonfiction, read fiction, read a bunch of stuff. Like I read like 6 or 7 books at a time, which is ridiculous. And by the way, that's not just because I'm like I have 6 or 7 books at the time. I just like picking and choosing from different sources, and like I just will read a chapter a day, chapter over here, over there. And so like, I'm actually going to cut my number down. I think I read 3 or 4 books at one time. I'll fact check myself live. But doing so just helps your writing so much because you're pulling from different ideas, you're pulling from different writing styles. And yeah.
I feel like you're one of the few people who actually finds time to read every day. Because like even before going to bed, you just pull up your what's that? You just pull up a book or something, and then you start
Kindle.
reading.
Hold a Kindle.
Yeah.
And I start my day reading something non-crypto
Mhm.
almost always. And I have Kindle app like downloaded everywhere. And I think that helps. Like, honestly, 15 minutes of reading non-crypto before you start the day, for anyone who wants, that's my version of touching grass, I guess.
Okay. Awesome. So last, before we wrap this up, how does it feel? A lot of pressure on Twitter and in general. How do you handle that? I feel like pressure is a good thing, but I want to get your like real thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's different, right? LayerZero is, in terms of messaging volume, in terms of adoption, like I think, one of the largest protocols in crypto. And I think I can say that like very confidently. And it's a place that I love working. It's a place that I believe in. Like when I look at LayerZero, the protocol, it's something that like I can like be passionate about and be confident about and like produce things for and like genuinely love every minute of it. In terms of being the comms guy for LayerZero, right? That comes with a couple different things, right? It comes with having to be able to produce content across a bunch of different channels, right? You have BD announcements, you have protocol updates, you have other things that we did earlier this year, which all require different writing styles. It all requires different types of content to be written. It all requires different cadences in terms of internal packaging of information and then externally publishing it. And I find it to be quite fascinating. I find it to be very, very fun. I also just shout out if anyone's listening. We are if you, marketing managers, research analysts, etc. Come hang out with LayerZero. But then there's the last thing with LZ is that as probably market leader, there is going to be a lot of FUD on the timeline. There's going to be a lot of people that want to tear down, and that's totally fine. That's actually a compliment a lot of the times, and I think the core idea at LZ is to focus on our comms, be direct, be authentic, put out as much stuff as we can, as fast as we can, and hope that is received well. But yeah.
Would that be your tip to anyone who's starting to write? Like, be authentic and put as much stuff out as possible.
Oh my gosh, yes, please be authentic, be yourself. Right? There's no I'll tell you as someone who's probably the target audience for a lot of crypto content. I think I am. I think you also are. Anything that's put out by a protocol, we are the exact people that need to be reading it. I love differentiated content. I love to read a different writing style. I love to listen to someone who has a kind of weird way to communicate information on a podcast. And so differentiate yourself. If you're getting started, push out so much stuff. I remember I think I probably wrote 25,000 to 100,000 words about Bitcoin before I ever even started working in the space, right? That was just me. I created a website, and I was writing about Bitcoin. That's how crazy I was back in the day. But I think that helped me at least get skills to a place that I was hireable at somewhere like Unchained, and then from there. Once you actually get into the workforce, you have different opportunities and you need to scale yourself. And the last piece of advice I would say is to just say yes. For example, at Unchained, I joined as an editorial assistant, and I was just kind of barely doing anything in the background, right? And then by the time I left Unchained, I was helping write a newsletter. I was doing a lot of stuff from a content standpoint that I didn't think I had signed up for. Same thing with at L.I.F and now at LayerZero. Just say yes and try to do the thing, and I think you'll surprise yourself in being able to do it a lot of the times.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mark, for doing this. I feel like there's a lot of insights for anyone listening who's just starting to market their protocol in Interop, and for writers as well, right? Because you're someone who's been there, done that, so you know what you're talking about. And I hope people find this interesting and insightful. So thank you for coming on, and hope we can do this again.
Yeah, I think we should probably do something more technical in nature at some point. But this was a fun way to start it, and I think this is a very important conversation. I don't think many people are talking about this. So happy to be on again at some point. But you do great work here.
Awesome.